So I want to talk about the drugs and the corruption because they obviously overlap in a lot of ways. So let's talk about it. You can start wherever you want with that, man.
So the first time I realized, I go into prison and I think it's going to be a very military type environment. You know what I mean? Do this, don't say this, don't, you know what I mean? I'm walking on the boulevard in Nottoway to go to the chow hall, and I see a group of young men standing around cheering on something. I don't know if there's a fight or what. So I walk around it, and as I walk around, I look, and there's a correction officer, female, twerking on the boulevard. And I'm like, hold up, are we in prison? Like, what is going on? And this is acceptable? And afterwards, one of the guys who was a gang member goes, I won't use his language because it's very offensive, unless, that's something you want your audience to know.
Whatever you want to say, there's no rules here, man.
Yeah, man, this is their language, not mine. He was like, nigga, this shit is like the hood. He was like, we got bitches, drugs, and my homies. I never want to leave. And I'm
End quote.
End quote.
End quote.
And I'm like, so that first word, the N word, is used. I hope I never hear it again. You can't have a conversation without hearing that word.
Yeah.
And so
it's culture. It's just the culture. Yeah. It is what it is. It's
the society within the society. And it's not a black thing. The whites do the same thing. I mean, like there was I think 5 guys from the same mountain neighborhood in West Virginia when I was there. And they were druggies and they were gang members, and they just recreated the environment they came from. It was insanity.
Yeah, but what you just said there is that the corrections officers are not only allowing this, but and to what level can they control it? But when you start contributing to it, that's a whole different
You're
deal.
Enabling this whole just corrupt, bad environment, but you're in charge of it. I'm not sure how to get the point across that everything that happened in there. And I'll give you another example. And the Department of Corrections can go, that doesn't happen. We have a policy on this. We have a policy on that. And they have, just boatloads of manuals and SOPs. So I understand that. And not all corrections officers are like that. Like I saw one of your podcasts had a correction officer on there. Mm-hmm. I mean, like he's beyond reproach, and that's admirable. But that wasn't what everybody. I experienced. Yeah, not at all. There's another
within that culture. Yep.
Right, man. Like one of the guards there was an active gang member. And somebody, people can go, how do you know that? Well, because they're gang signing each other, and he's letting his set get away with everything. On commissary day, commissary is when you buy extra food because you don't get enough food in prison. Not the ones I was in. He would be in the booth controlling 2 pods. He would open up the opposing pod, and I saw this with my own eyes. He would let his gang members come in and rob the white guys at Blade Point, take their groceries. He'd hit the button and let them back out and close the door back up. And I'm like, what did I just witness?
Yeah.
They're not even from this pod, and he lets his homies in there to rob the white guys of the groceries. And I'm like, anything can happen to me inside this prison.
Yep.
And there will be justification, and they can cover anything up.
You mentioned the drug use, and that you'd never seen any more drugs and learn more about drugs inside the prison system than you could have ever imagined, even outside. Can you talk about that a little bit? Sure,
man. So I spent a month or 2 at Nottoway. It was a transition point before you go to other prisons. It was a level 3, 4. So we're in cells, and people would start smoking, and I didn't know what they were smoking. I literally had to ask somebody. Well, they're smoking K2. I'm like, what is K2? And it's a chemical compound coming from cannabis that's kind of moved around, and it just makes you high and hallucinate. But they also smoke what was called man down. And I'm like, I don't know any of this.
Educate me. I have no idea what that is.
Yeah. Man down, and they smoke it constantly. It's roach spray and paint thinner on a sheet of paper from the woodworking shop. And they cut it up into stamps and they sell it. And these guys smoke that nonstop. So you have, on top of being in the pod with hardened criminals that have done years and years, now they're all high. and they're losing track of reality. They're screaming, hollering all the time. It's just a mess.
So talk to me about this. Like, I mean, you wouldn't possibly know, but I'm just going to ask you to make a guess just in terms of the propensity of drug use in a place like that. What percentage of the population do you think is using some type of controlled substance, if you
So
want?
I did this when I was transferred to St. Bride's. So I left Nottoway, went to St. Bride's, and St. Bride's was worse. I was in a pod with about 100 guys. And one day I took account of how many guys do not do drugs, including myself, 3 guys.
Oh,
so
you actually did this.
I actually did this. I'm stuck in a pod with 100 criminals.
Okay.
I went around and I looked. I'm like, because they smoke it from the morning. I mean, it's just not K2. It's just not man down. Meth was huge in there.
How are they getting it? How are they getting all that stuff?
Correction officers. And I know this to be true. I know this to be true. And everybody knows it. And, you know, I'm not calling out the inmates, the convicts, because that's who they are. But enabling this type of behavior, and I'm talking about guys have died from drugs inside prison. It was not uncommon for count time, 6 o'clock in the morning, you stand by your bunk, and you hear on the radio, hey, we need a stretcher in 340. Somebody fell out. I need a wheelchair in 320. Because the guys are so blasted on drugs, and it's brought in by the correction officers.
Yeah, they're complicit.
No, absolutely. And they're enabling this whole just harmful environment that these guys are doing more harm to themselves, but they think it's normal because they come from a drug addict environment. But at a given time, a correction officer may decide that, okay, press charges on this guy for working out in the pod. Yeah, it was just bizarre behavior. And Suboxone was a big one. Suboxone is what's used to come off of heroin. Well, they're strips. They're just called strips in prison. And there's guys that would have like 500 strips.
To sell.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So people are like, well, how do they get money? Well, in prison, commissary, groceries money, phone times money, and then Cash App. So on the outside, they'll call their people who have Cash App and say, hey, Cash App, this address, $25. So the guy dealing drugs gets $25 on his girlfriend's Cash App.
It's like Uber Eats.
Yeah. And what they do, and it just blew my mind, is they get these strips, they cut them up and like a nail size, thumbnail, maybe smaller. They'll put it in their eye. It's called eye shots. So they'll sit back and they'll take this strip of Suboxone and they'll put it on their eye. And then you just see them, the heroin nods start and they go out. And you're like, how? At first it took me like, how are the correction officers not seeing this? Like you're walking through the pod and there's people passed out. There's puke all over the place. There's people freaking out. And then the more I watched, I knew when the drugs were going to be re-upped by what correction officer was working on what day. I knew when the pod ran dry. And then all of a sudden it's loaded up again on this night, on this person's night. I'm like, okay, I get it. You know what I mean? Battery shots, K2, same thing. They cut them up into small little squares, get a piece of Brillo pad, double end the wire over the battery and hit it with a stem and smoke it. Meth was everywhere.